Today's topic is one of the Peninsula battles. Wellington's not, well, he's not Wellington during it, but he's performs well again. But it's a very strange battle, and I feel like it pushed both commanders to the brink. And I really wouldn't call it a quote unquote victory for either side. What is your overview of Talavera?
This battle, which was fought in the summer of 1809 in western Spain, is one of the famous ones of the Peninsular War. It was the first major battle that the future Wellington fought after coming back from the Convention of Sintra. And I know everybody's screaming about the Battle of Porto, but it's not quite on the same scale, because this is the largest general action the British Army has been involved in for a good many decades, actually, with both sides bringing to the field up to about 100,000 men. It's a very large battle. It's fought over 2 days. In the searing heat, there's a lot of famous legendary exploits that happen in this that's popularized by Bernard Cornwell. Sharp, I think this is the battle where Sharp wins his eagle and things like that. So people know it from there. But it's also a very fascinating battle to study in terms of the development of the Duke of Wellington's military career, and also the career of the Peninsular War in general. It marks the end of a campaign that people had very high hopes for in terms of the British involving themselves again in actual peninsular Spain. It is tactically conclusive for the British. It is not strategically conclusive for the British. It's more strategically conclusive for the French, although that only becomes clear afterwards. It can be claimed as a British victory, and it generally is claimed as a British victory. But like all things in war, things are more complicated than just a rubber stamp at the end of a letter or something like that. So it is a big mess of a battle, which is very fun to talk about.
Yeah, it strikes me kind of like one of these bloodletting battles like Eylau or Albuera, where they kind of just run into each other over and over again. Nothing really gets solved. One side claims victory, but I mean, there's a lot of casualties on both sides.
There are. I mean, the reason why it is mostly framed as a British victory is because essentially Napoleon admits that. And we'll get to that in sort of the legacy section, I guess. And where it is different from, say, the Battle of Eylau and the Battle of Albuera is that in this battle, Wellesley, as he is at that time, is in full control of what's going on, especially on the second major day of the battle. This is one of the classic Wellingtonian defensive battles where he is just outthinking what is happening in front of him, and he is able to. So he's honing that style that he becomes so well known for in this. He's testing things, he's seeing how the French do things, and that is why it's not quite as chaotic as Eylau and whatnot, but it is a punishing battle. You're right, there are very high casualties, and and that is something that Wellesley again takes away from this battle. That is something that I would really like to avoid in the future.
Yeah, and I think it really cleverly shows him, where he positions his troops, putting reserves in the right spots, and beating back the French whenever they're about to have a breakthrough. Kind of like Waterloo. He's like, all right, well, let's figure this out, and he does a good job of that.
He does, yes. And to give the French credit, they have a lot of things piling against them at this point in the Peninsular War, and they, as usual, they're a very dangerous enemy. So yeah. You can't take them for granted.
Well, let's kind of lay the groundwork of how we get to this battle. The Peninsular War has kind of ebbed and flowed with initial victories by the French over the Portuguese, the British, and Spanish. Yes, I know they never beat the British directly, but the British had to evacuate via Corona and all that. But the British and Spanish also had some success against the Grand Army at Rolisa, Vimero, Bailen. Marshal Soult has recently been ejected from Portugal after Wellington's surprise victory, as you mentioned, at Oporto. What else is happening at this time?
So the gap between the expulsion of the French after the Battle of Porto, you have Wellesley meditating on the idea of invading Spain to aid the remaining Spanish armies still on the field, particularly the one commanded by a friend of ours from a previous episode, Gregorio de Cuesta. And he feels he can do this because of Cuesta's presence still in the field, despite his resounding defeat at the Battle of Medellin in March at the hands of Marshal Victor. And Wellesley at this point is still sort of the Wellesley of India. And that means he likes to take the offensive. That means he'll take more risks than he will later on in the war. And he's, in a way, a little bit more dangerous because he'll take those risks. And he does tend to have pretty good troops. He's quite audacious still. And this is still India mode in Wellesley's head. I've got them on the run. I am going to plunge into Spain, and I'm going to see what I can do here. The conditions look quite good. The Spanish are theoretically promising to support the British with supplies. The British foolishly believe that they can do this, whereas they really can't. And a meeting is held between Wellesley and Cuesta before the campaign opens, and they meet on the border, and they have this sort of farcical discussion about how they're going to how the coalition is going to work, how the alliance is going to work, who's going to do what. They divide the work between each other, but Cuesta doesn't particularly trust the British, possibly because of the retreat to Coruña. He can't speak English, but he can speak French. But he but he pretends he cannot speak French, and has one of his aides talk to Wellington in translation of his Spanish through French, just to be awkward. It's a bit of a power play. It's a bit like he doesn't want to give away too much because he doesn't really trust the British.
Well, I find that even though they have trouble working together, it's better than them working separately. You know, the Battle of Ocaña, the Spanish get absolutely destroyed by Soult. So I think it behooves both of them to somehow work together.
Yes, and they do come up with a plan, and Wellesley sees the sort of the mettle of Cuesta, and Cuesta sort of gets on board with what Wellesley's going to do, and so they sort of get over the mistrust to some extent when they realize, okay, we both want to fight the French here, like in Spain, so let's make this work.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about the commanders. I know you mentioned Cuesta. Obviously, we know a lot about the future Duke of Wellington. On the French side, what do we know about Marshal Victor?
Well, the French command, as is fairly common in French armies in Spain, especially when they unite, is divided, to say the least. That's the first thing to say about French command. Victor, in this battle, plays a role very similar to that of Marshal Ney at Waterloo. He is not technically in command of the army. He has had independent command of an army group because he's been chasing Cuesta around and knocking him around the head whenever possible. But Victor, he's a very experienced officer, but he's actually quite a new marshal. He's only been a marshal for about 2 years. He had joined the National Guard at the outbreak of the French Revolution, and then he had risen through the ranks after Toulon, becomes General de Brigade and General de Division, and then he fights very creditably through the 1806 and 1807 campaigns, and it's after he breaks the Russian center at Friedland that he's given the marshal's baton. And then what happens to him then is what happens to a lot of new marshals from this period. They get sent to Spain to test themselves. You know, it seems like a good theater of war. It's the main one that's happening at the second. You guys go off, run down in Spain, do your thing. We'll get some nice Mediterranean titles for you, right, and everything will be good. And it does look like it's working out because Victor's having a decent time of it.
Right.
But suffice to say that the French are in a little bit of trouble at this point because by 1809, not only are the British back, but there are still Spanish armies running around in the corners of the country, and nobody has a concerted plan to get rid of them.
Mm-hmm.
And Victor's force here, near Talavera, is the main thing that is stopping the Spanish and the British driving down the road to Madrid. So he has a very important job. He's a very experienced officer. He seems to be a very trusted and talented officer. And this is going to be his greatest test yet, because now he has to come up not up against fragmented Spanish armies, who, again, I'll take a moment here and say that he almost lost the Battle of Medellin against Cuesta. And it was a lucky, fortunate stroke of luck that allowed him to win it, and then punish the Spanish quite dramatically during the pursuit. So maybe he's not as bright a star as it seems if he comes up against a tougher opponent. But I suppose we'll have to see what happens as the battle plays out. Yeah. He also has, of course, some superiors to deal with in this battle.
He does, and it's not easy to work with the King of Spain, Joseph Bonaparte, behind your back, and his chief of staff, Marshal Jourdan, kind of second guessing everything you're doing.
Yeah,
but I think Victor is obviously an intriguing character. He has some moral compass problems, but he was with Napoleon at the very beginning, through the Italy campaign, Marengo. He's with him all through the Battle of France in 1814. So, like Napoleon said, like most people think he's a very average general, but Napoleon said he's better than most think.
He's one of the reliable ones, but that generally means he's best kept in the main army group where you can keep an eye on him and give him a concerted task kind of job. And to be fair to Victor in this battle, he does not have strong leadership from either Marshal Jourdan or the King of Spain. And
right.
Just to also point out, a lot of people will already be familiar with this, Joseph Bonaparte is the King of Spain at the second. That means if he is in the field with an army, the rules of kings and stuff means that he commands that army. Generally, wise kings delegate to actual soldiers and say, "No, you command the army. I'm just here for inspiration."
Mm-hmm.
To be fair to Joseph, he does basically do this, but it is not clear who he gives that authority to. It's assumed it's Marshal Jourdan, who is his chief of staff / military advisor. However, it's not concretely given to Jourdan. And Victor, as I said before, is kind of given the tactical operational lead.
Okay. Well, how many troops and cannons did each side bring to the battle? And I want to have a secondary question on General Cuesta. We did an episode on him. I think it was episode 37 of my podcast on Cuesta. But if you could briefly touch on him too, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, as I say, it's a pretty big battle. You have up to almost around 100,000 men on both sides. That breaks down to roughly 46,000 men on the French side and about 55,000 men on the Allied side. The French have 80 guns and the Allies have about 60. The Allied force is broken in two. Is broken in two. You have commanding around 33 or more thousand is our friend Gregorio de Cuesta. Charles Esdale has called him the best of the old regular Spanish army officers. This is essentially because he is a principled and experienced general who knows the rules of war and the rules of armies and how to conduct himself and how to conduct armies. He has been struggling throughout the war so far to try and remake a workable Spanish force. Unfortunately, this has not been terribly successful. He is getting kind of old at this point, but his reputation as a doddering old fool is not, as many will know him in this battle, is not. It's not deserved, especially if you read accounts of British officers who were with the Spanish armies earlier in the war. They'll talk about his bravery and his sense, and he gets things wrong like everybody does, but it's not an easy situation to be a Spanish general at this point in history.
Sure.
So he's a good. He is objectively a good commander, and if things had been better, he probably would have been a very good partner to Wellesley if the Spanish government had not been in complete ruin, basically.
Right. Okay. Well, the combined Anglo-Spanish army link up near the Tagus Valley, I should say, about 120 kilometers or 75 miles southwest of Madrid. And the two-day battle begins with a surprise night attack by Marshal Victor on July 27th. Why were night attacks so rare in the Napoleonic Wars?
So, two things spring to mind. First of all, the geography you mentioned, which people might want to get a little grip on, and also the night attack question. And we'll be able to deal with both. The Tagus Valley is one of the most important theaters of the Spanish war, the Guerra de Independencia, the War of Independence, as the Spanish call it. And if you look at a map of Spain, especially if you try and find a topographical one, you'll see that it's sort of segmented into a kind of a fork. Imagine a fork in your hand. Those gaps are plains that sit in the sort of the bulk of Spain, and they're separated by mountains that some of them go west to east and some of them go north to south. And the Tagus Valley sits in the northern plain. It's almost a bowl between the mountains of Portugal, two west-east facing mountain ranges, and the Iberian system, as it's called, which is the system before the Pyrenees. So as you can see, to control Spain, you need to control these pockets. And it just so happens that this pocket has a main route to Madrid on it. So this is a very important geographical place to control, and that's why everybody's here. Now, the battle becomes a sort of a battle of encounter to begin with, that both sides kind of stumble into each other. And sometimes in the Napoleonic Wars and in previous wars, when you stumble into an opponent and you have a brief skirmish and you fall back, you suddenly come up with the idea, oh, okay, well, if they're not ready, maybe I'll try and get the drop on them. Maybe I'll do a sneak attack at night and do that. The reason why this is not so popular, the reason why it doesn't happen very often is fairly obvious, I think, to everybody. You can't see at night.
Yeah, there's only torchlight, and the great lesson. Stonewall Jackson was returning at dusk, and was shot by his own men because they didn't know who he was. They thought he was enemy cavalry. So it's very dangerous.
It is very dangerous. Think about it. Like you say, the objective is surprise, so you can't use light. That means you have to have somebody who has a supremely good knowledge of the ground. In this instance, the French had a go at taking a principal geographical feature called the Cerro de Medellin. So at least they had a kind of a dark bulk to aim for.
It's like a hill.
Yeah, it's a hill. And you get your columns together, you point them at that, they will reach it. But they might not reach it in great order, they might not reach it in the same time. Think about how many men are involved in this maneuver. How are you going to get them into line? How are you going to deploy them? How are you going to maneuver if something goes wrong? When you hit the enemy, how do you know how many there are? It's a complete mess. And so it's just very risky.
And you had smoke and cannon smoke and shouting and screaming. Yeah.
Admittedly, if you can pull it off, it can work extremely well, and it's one of the most effective ways of gaining surprise over the enemy. But it happens so rarely, I can't actually bring a good example to mind of a full, proper night attack working. I know of it, like you can march through the night and attack at dawn when you can see. That's the most common kind of derivation of a night attack.
Yeah.
But actually hitting someone at midnight and fighting through the hours of darkness is generally a recipe for disaster and confusion.
Yeah, and it does. It generates some confusion. The British rally, though, British General Hill performed some miracles here, and the French are driven away. And Hill was famously heard to swear for what would only be the second time in his life. The British line held, but they suffer 800 casualties. Why didn't Victor press his advantage here? I feel like this is the point where maybe Joseph or Jourdan interfered with him.
I don't know if Joseph or Jourdan had a lot to say about this. They may have given an order. One of them may have given an order to call off the attack once the initial repulse occurred. But the night attack is actually Victor trying to press his advantage from what happened earlier in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Because earlier in the day, the Spanish and the British had been overextended across the river, further than they needed to be. And this is a little bit to do with the difficulties of making the alliance work so early on. They don't know each other, stuff like that. One day, Wellesley said, I want to advance X miles up this way, take this position. Cuesta said, I don't want to. Then the next day, Cuesta moved his troops anyway without telling Wellesley, and Wellesley had to move with him. And then, so everybody's a bit confused. And then Victor shows up, and one of the British brigades gets kind of roughed up, and they fall back to the Talavera position. Victor thinks he's got him on the run, and they're confused, so the night attack happens. So this is him actually trying to press his advantage and take that hill, which would then render the position useless, as you say. Actually, the French do actually crown the height. Hill almost gets killed because he almost rides into the French column because he thinks it's a British column.
Mm-hmm.
But he's quick-witted enough to just ride back down the hill, grab the nearest battalion he can, and lead it up. And they get a good counterattack and they get the French running. And then I believe that a order comes from Jourdan to cease activities because, well, reasonably speaking, they had lost the element of surprise and we're never going to take that thing.
Right. And there's also an incident where 2,000 Spanish troops ran away after a short musket battle with the French. The future Wellington noted that, quote, they left their arms and accoutrements on the ground. Their officers went with them, and they plundered the baggage of the British army, which had been sent to the rear, end quote. So clearly there's some disadvantages of coalition warfare happening here.
Yeah, there's some issues here. This incident is routinely quoted to kind of give the impression that the Spanish are terrible soldiers. They can't be trusted. They're all vagabonds, and this was a common idea by the British at the time. It did happen, and it certainly did not help the reputation of the Spanish army. But for a bit of context, I've mentioned the Battle of Medellin, which did not occur on the Cerro de Medellin at Talavera. It happened a good distance away from this battlefield, just has the same name as the hill. So to preface this, basically, General Cuesta almost pulls off a victory, and we talked about this in the episode before, where his infantry fill the gap between two rivers and march towards the French. They do this, I believe, because, and they do this in very deep lines, they do this because he knows that he can't get his troops to maneuver in front of the enemy. This is what you do if your men are poorly trained, simply trained. They can stand in line, they can shoot, that's it. Now, these are basically the same troops, or like reorganized units of the same army that got defeated at Medellin and were very badly beaten by Victor. And they see some French dragoons moving through the olive groves, and they're skirmishing, they're taking pot shots, they're moving aggressively as usual. They're trying to find out what's up there. This is before the night attack. And for unknown reasons, which I would guess are to do with the poor morale and skittishness of the Spanish infantry, they open fire. Now, I want you to think about what's just happened here, right? You're an 18th century soldier. You have maybe been in the ranks for a number of months. You've been through a battle. You got completely destroyed. What was that army defeated by? French dragoons, right? You have just unloaded your musket. You do not know how to form a square. Your officers can't get you to form a square or maneuver in front of you.
Sure.
You are powerless if the French charge.
Yeah.
You actually expect the French to charge, so you run.
Yeah, I mean, if your confidence is shaken from, and you see it with the French later in the Peninsular War with the British, their confidence is shaken, like, we can't beat these guys, and it gets in your head.
Yeah. And so they run, and they start plundering the baggage train as they leave, as they're on the way out. Cuesta is absolutely incandescent with rage. He wants to shoot a whole bunch of officers, which Wellesley tells him, no, there's no need to do mass executions here. But this is a poor moment for Anglo-Spanish relations, because the British take this. They don't try to understand why they ran away. They just ran away.
Well, the next morning after the night attack on July 28th, the Spanish army, most of the Spanish army who did not run away, for clarity, is under Cuesta and is holding the right side of the Allied line, while the British hold the left. What happens from here?
This is really the planning stage. It's all about deployment. The French approach and They have to come up with a plan. The military topography is a problem for the French because the Anglo-Spanish have got themselves a good position. Their right is anchored on the city and the river, and their left is anchored on a valley. And they're standing on top of a hill at the moment. So the French see a very a formidable position, and there's an argument about whether they should attack it or not, and eventually decide they will attack it. And plans are therefore made. Orders are given for the French centre right to attack the British left centre from the hill to that valley. Basically, I believe it is given. The lead is given to General Ruffin.
Yeah.
And that is the plan that they come up with. For Wellesley, he's just continuing moving troops up into positions and trying to figure out where the French are going to hit him first, very carefully watching French troop movements, because he can see everything from where he is on top of the hill. He doesn't have his full force there either, as many people will know. The Light Brigade under General Crawford is quick marching through Portugal and Spain to try and get there in time for the action. So he's a little understrength, even though the Allies actually outnumber the French in total.
Yeah, I know Victor urges a massive assault, but is overruled by Joseph and Chief of Staff Jourdan. Instead, the French artillery open up and inflict some damage to the British, and Wellington wisely does his reverse slope thing and says, let's get out of range. So the French try and conquer that hill again, and it seems like they always do like some damage on whatever British unit is there, but then Wellington just moves reserves, right, to wherever the problem area is.
Yes, generally speaking, that is the benefit of his use of ground. He has this ability, this adeptness of putting himself in his opponent's shoes and figuring out how he would attack. And if I'm going to attack there, then I should probably already be moving a brigade to that position. He's very good at second guessing the French. Whenever they get moving. The attack rumbles up a little bit like Vimiero, and it is met by the long British battalion lines. They come up in columns, and the lines overlap the columns. They get flanking fire on the sides and the front. The French columns cannot deploy fast enough. They take heavy casualties. Panic ensues, and they run back down the hill. That is the nutshell version of the classic Wellingtonian defense. Very well timed, and that is the assault on the left and center. He pulled his men back in front of the face of the artillery fire, which went on for a while.
Yeah,
it's very Waterloo-like, actually, that bombardment, because despite the fact they don't really have good targets, they do pound away for a while, hoping that they will have opened a lane somewhere in the defenses, but they don't really manage to do so. So the one time in the battle where the British do get into some trouble, though, is when they pursue too far, and then the French counterattack. However, well, as you said, Wellesley has already seen this happening and has already gone to fetch reserves. But generally speaking, that is the dynamic.
That's kind of Waterloo as well, where the British cavalry charges too far, and then they get overwhelmed by a counterattack. So yeah, foreshadowing for Waterloo. Okay, so again, the British line is held, and they beat back the French attacks, like you said. Victor orders another assault in the afternoon, saying, quote, if I don't succeed in one more shot, I ought to chuck soldiering, end quote. The decisive moment comes in this third assault. They launch a final desperate attack. They're met with a wall of British bayonets and lead, and redcoats standing firm, wave after wave, the typical British history. And as darkness fell, the French resolve just kind of crumbled and said, we can't crack this nut. And I think Victor wanted to do one more, and I think Joseph and Jourdan wisely said, no, you're done.
Yeah, they had been going at it all day. It was fiercely hot. The men were exhausted. There had been a lull in the middle of the battle, actually, where both sides had come down to what they called the Portinha Brook, right after that very dramatic moment where the guards actually push too far down and then get repulsed, and then the French in turn get repulsed. Everybody came down to the river and basically had some water and chatted with each other for a bit, and then went back to killing each other. In a very classic moment in the Napoleonic Wars. the Peninsular War especially, where the French and the British start getting weirdly chummy with each other.
Yeah, I always find that amazing. Like we were just trying to kill each other a minute ago. Yeah.
Yeah, but we're really tired now, so yeah. And then the last grand attack goes up. This is by General Sebastiani's division on the left. I think Victor probably had the right idea. They really needed to sort of exert major pressure across a wide face simultaneously rather than just hitting one place at a time.
Yeah.
He had the right idea, but he wasn't allowed to do it, and so the attack was repulsed as well. The interesting thing about that attack was it was supported by the Spanish on the right, especially by the Dragoon Regiment El Rey, which charged in pursuit of the French retreat, and they actually overran a battery of German allied French artillery, which is it's a very celebrated moment for the Spanish cavalry.
Okay.
What happens at the end, like you say, is yes, Victor kind of wants to have another go, but very wisely at this point now it's Jourdan and Joseph who are thinking that's not a good idea. There is a final weird throw of the dice at the end as Victor moves exhausted divisions to the right towards the valley to see if there's a way around the right for the next day. But the British see this and they launch a cavalry charge out to suppress that because they think that the French are going to actually try and take this valley that their left is anchored on.
Yeah.
And this ends in a very British cavalry-like fashion, where they go forward, the French form squares, and unfortunately, not only are the French prepared for them, but there's a gully in front of them that they don't see, and the British cavalry ride right into it. And utter confusion reigns. Many horses break their legs. Riders are thrown over the heads of their horses. Massive wounded and casualties. They go on in disorder. They get repulsed in disorder. It's a bad end of the day for the British because of this. But they have held their ground.
Yeah. And I kind of see Joseph and Jordan's point. Like, look, we're 75 miles from the capital where my throne is. This is my only army in between it. You had your chance. We're just going to retreat at this point.
Yeah, it's very wise. It's a very wise decision.
So what are the final casualty numbers on both sides?
The final casualty numbers are quite high. This has been a long battle, fought over 2 days with a lot of men, a lot of cannons, and cannons are generally the thing that kill people. So we have about 7,300 French and 5,300 Allied rounded up, killed, wounded, and missing.
Okay. So on the legacy portion of it, I mean, the battle doesn't really result in anything. Yes, I know it's more laurels for the future Duke of Wellington. Yes, I know it's a setback for Napoleon's marshals yet again, but it's no Salamanca or, Austerlitz. It's not a clinching campaign-ending victory.
No, it isn't. If anything, it ends the Allied campaign rather than clinching the fall of Madrid. People actually haven't figured out yet that you really don't want to hold Madrid because Madrid is indefensible. You can't actually defend it. It's actually better if you just wander around it. But at this point, the Allies kind of hoped that they could reach a position where they could threaten it at the very least, and they haven't been able to do that because of this battle. First of all, because of the casualties sustained, that is a lot of men and wounded to have to try and take care of. There were actually grass fires that people had to be rescued from because of the insane heat and all the cartridges being fired off. For the French, there's that, despite the fact they did get repulsed and lost more men. Now, the funny thing about this is that the generals and Joseph lie through their teeth to Napoleon. They tell him they won, and then he reads the British newspapers and realizes, you didn't quite win, did you, boys? And so he's absolutely enraged by this. Not only have they lied to him, but they have misled his plans. Like, he can't give accurate orders if you don't tell me what's happened. This is just part of the continuing story of Napoleon trying to run things from Paris and people being too afraid to kind of tell him, using that distance to shield themselves from his wrath when they mess up.
I know Napoleon always said, wake me up if it's bad news, let me sleep if it's good news. But I think, like any person, you want to over exaggerate your performance to your boss, and you want to underscore things that went poorly. So yeah, I can
It's
see why Napoleon.
understandable. It's
Yeah.
understandable, but this did not help him. And obviously, because he had been misled, and because he has now a warped understanding of the actual situation, he's going to give even worse orders for people to try and carry through and accomplish. Meanwhile, Wellesley decides that he can't progress because there's not enough Spanish logistical support, and he's lost too many men. And so he's going to retreat to Portugal. Quest is very angry about this, but there's not a lot he can do about it. Wellesley is so worried that the French are going to come after him that he leaves his wounded in Talavera and marches back to Portugal. Now, the French do take care of them. They don't slaughter them or anything like that, but it is a very telling event that shows that although he won the battle, the army is not in great shape.
Right. And people are like, well, how could Wellington do this? But you have to remember, like, he's got other French marshals running around like Ney and Soult who could cut him off from his logistics, his supply line.
Yeah.
And, I think the standing order from London was like, look, this is our only standing army. Don't lose it.
Yeah. The Battle of Coruña, the retreat to Coruña was literally January that year. The battle was fought then. They do not want a repeat of that. They don't want another army just barely escaping with its life. Wellesley now decides he has to get his men out of there and back to Portugal, and he has learned a lot from this battle. This is the battle where you might say he completely now understands how to fight the French, both tactically and strategically, in Spain and Portugal, and what is going to be needed to actually properly invade Spain. He has got to do a lot more groundwork, and he will not touch Spanish soil for another 3 years practically after this point. The upshot for Wellesley is that he stops being Wellesley. Because, I mean, the reports that go back to London don't really frame it in this kind of, well, we fought, we got knocked, we beat each other up, and then I had to run back to Portugal and abandon Cuesta. Right. He basically said, we repulsed the French completely, and then I did a tactical withdrawal because the Spanish abandoned me back to Portugal. So they give him a title.
But also, that's like Victor, that's kind of flowery reporting.
It is. Yeah. Wellesley absolutely understood the benefit of being able to tell your own story and tell it quickly. Right. As with Battle of Albuera, Beresford writes a completely distraught, dismal report of this battle, and Wellington sends it back to him and says, "Write me a victory."
Right. Yeah. Well, he understands PR. He gets it.
If he wants to maintain his army in Portugal, he has to give the government a reason to keep it there. And so a rosier picture of the Battle of Talavera is given.
Well, thank you for that, Josh. Awesome overview of Talavera. I've been wanting to do that battle for a while. Again, if you'd like to learn more about Josh, I highly recommend you subscribe and like his Adventures in Historyland YouTube channel. And if you'd like to read a really good book, you can hop on Amazon, Every Hazard and Fatigue, The Siege of Pensacola, for a good read. And Josh, we thank you. This was great.
Thank you for having me back. It's a lot of fun to talk about the Peninsular War. I mean, I must apologize if I have fluffed any of the details or got them mixed up, because it has been a little while since I've been doing the Peninsular War with detail, because I've been lost in the 18th century for the last year or two.
You did great. You did great.
Lots of fun.
Yeah. All right, my friend. Well, we'll talk to you soon.